We all want to make better decisions, but what if the key isn't in those huge, life-altering choices we stress about? What if it's actually hidden in the thousands of tiny, ordinary moments we barely even notice? Well, today we're diving into exactly that with the powerful ideas from Shane Parrish's book, Clear Thinking. Okay, so let's start with this single sentence right here, because it captures a feeling I think we've all had. That gut-wrenching terror of being exposed, of having your judgment picked apart when the stakes are sky high. And believe it or not, this feeling is the exact starting point for this entire framework. Our story begins with a truly high-stakes problem. The year is 2001, it's August, and the author, Shane Parrish, has just landed a new job at a Canadian intelligence agency. But get this, just a few weeks into the job, the world is completely turned on its head. And suddenly, Parrish is thrown into the deep end, forced to solve these incredibly complex, new problems where people's lives are literally on the line. Failure was just not an option. The pressure was unbelievable. So after one particular operation doesn't go quite as planned, he knows he has to face his boss. And he's just consumed by this one question. Did I miss something? Did I think this through clearly enough? I mean, how could he possibly know for sure? His entire thought process was about to be put under a microscope. So he walks into his boss's office and he just comes clean. He says, I wasn't ready for this. And his boss's reply, it was anything but comforting. He just says, no one is ready, but you and this team are all we got. And that terrifying moment, that moment of truth, kicked off a decade-long obsession to figure out why some people make great decisions under pressure while so many others just crumble. And that whole quest led him to a really fundamental distinction, something that applies to every single one of us. It's the critical difference between actually thinking and just reacting. And that leads to this really important question. See, most books about decision-making kind of assume we're just bad thinkers, but Parrish's argument is way more profound. In the moments that matter the most, he says, the problem isn't that we're thinking badly, it's that we're not thinking at all. We're just reacting. In that tiny little gap, that split second between something happening and how we respond, we have a choice. We can either hit pause and apply some reason, or our brain just runs what he calls a default behavior. These are our automatic, pre-programmed reactions hardwired into our biology for survival. Think about it for a second. A coworker says something a little passive-aggressive about your project in a meeting, and boom, before you even know it, a snarky comment flies right out of your mouth. Someone cuts you off on the highway, and you're instantly seeing red. These aren't conscious choices, right? They're gut reactions, and they almost always make things worse. So where do these reactions come from? Well, Parrish boils them down to what he calls the 4 defaults, these ancient survival programs that, honestly, often sabotage us in the modern world. He basically identifies 4 main culprits that are running our lives on autopilot when we're not paying attention. Let's take a quick look at what he calls the 4 defaults. First up, you've got the emotion default, where our feelings just take the steering wheel. Then there's the ego default, where we lash out the second our self-worth feels threatened. Next is the social default, that powerful need we have to just fit in. And finally, the inertia default, which is our natural resistance to change. These are the real enemies of clear thinking. Okay, so theory is one thing, but what does this actually look like in the real world? Let's check out a story about the ego default in action, featuring a CEO that Parrish once worked with. These were the CEO's exact words right after a really explosive phone call. So the CEO is on the phone, he's beet red with rage, just screaming at someone. Turns out the person on the other end was an employee who was desperately trying to flag a really serious issue. But the CEO's ego felt attacked, so instead of listening, he just reacted with pure, unfiltered anger. The employee couldn't get a single word in. So, what do you think that employee did? They went straight to the board. And a short time later, the CEO was fired. And here's the kicker. It wasn't because he got angry. It was because his ego-driven reaction literally prevented him from hearing critical information he needed to act on. His default behavior, his unthinking reaction, cost him his job. So, if these defaults are so powerful, how in the world do we overcome them? Well, it all comes down to mastering our ordinary moments. And if we can do that, we can fundamentally change the entire trajectory of our lives. We tend to obsess over the big stuff, right? Who to marry, what career to pick. But Parrish argues that our future is actually forged in the fire of all these little, ordinary moments, that snappy comeback in a meeting, or the choice to just listen instead of interrupting. Every single one of those moments either makes our future path easier or a whole lot harder. He uses this brilliant analogy. Life is kind of like a game of Tetris. When you let your defaults run the show, you end up poorly positioned. You got a messy board, very few options, and you're just praying for that one specific piece to save you. But when you think clearly, you become well-positioned. You have options. Lots of different pieces will work just fine. You start to master your circumstances instead of being mastered by them. And that, right there, is the whole game. Clear thinking in the small moments, it compounds over time. Every good, thoughtful response puts you in a slightly better position for whatever comes next, and every unthinking reaction does the opposite. Over a lifetime, that difference becomes absolutely massive. So ultimately, it all comes down to this one simple but incredibly powerful question. The next time you feel that little flash of anger, or that sting to your ego, or that pull to just go along with the crowd, what are you going to do? In that tiny, crucial space between what happens and how you respond, will you let your defaults decide for you, or will you choose to think clearly? Your answer will shape your future.